those who have to deal with, face, and interview these evil people are certainly more brave than I, because they are looking pure evil right in the face. From chilling confessions to eerie tales and all of the horrifying stories in between, here are the top 10 terrifying convict confessions that will haunt you. Starting off this list in our number 10 spot, we have Daniel Wozniak. In 2010, Daniel Patrick Wozniak had his wedding and honeymoon coming up that were of course going to cost a lot of money. Instead of like getting a second job or simply just doing anything else in the entire world, he decided to do the unthinkable. He ended up taking the life of his neighbor Samuel Hare and his friend Juri Kibushi so that he could steal money from them. It is absolutely insane that this is the story behind the crime, but I cannot make this stuff up. He ended up confessing his crimes to police.
You said you wanted to talk to me. What's going on?
I'm crazy and I did it.
You did what?
I killed Julie and I killed Sam.
Okay.
It is so strange how he's so matter-of-fact about that, but then suddenly it's like a switch flips and he's acting like the Joker.
Sam was
Money and insanity.
money and insanity. Okay.
That laugh is truly chilling, you guys. Daniel ended up being apprehended by US Marshals at his bachelor party 2 days before his wedding. The trial was very long, but in 2016 he was found guilty and ended up being sentenced to death. In our number 9 spot today we have the Iceman. Richard Kuklinski became one of America's most prolific serial killers after finding his career as a contract killer, which he did for about 30 years, but he also decided to carry out some killings when he wasn't being hired to do it, making him most definitely a serial killer. While he only ended up being charged and convicted for 4 killings, he had claimed that the number was actually closer to 250. He killed his victims in a multitude of ways, and he was known for being especially cruel. In a chilling confession by the killer, he explains the story behind one man's life he took, saying, quote, "It was a man and he was begging and pleading and praying, I guess, and he was please Godding all over the place. So I told him he could have half an hour to pray to God, and if God could come down and change the circumstances, he'd have that time." The story he's telling is actually about one of the crimes he kind of feels an inkling of remorse about. He continues on to say that God never showed up and finished by saying, quote, "That's one thing, I shouldn't have done that one." In our number 8 spot today we have Manuel Vela. In 2016, Manuel took the life of his girlfriend Katrina Rivera. She was initially reported missing, but after taking police on a car chase, he ended up being arrested and her body was found inside of the car. There are some exceptionally disturbing details about this case that I cannot go into, but it definitely was an incredibly terrible situation. After the chase, he was taken into police custody where he continued to display strange and scary behavior, and he also ended up confessing to the crime.
Do you think that you're possessed by the devil?
Me?
Yeah.
I'm the Antichrist.
Apparently this all happened because she had told him that she didn't want to be together anymore, which truly is so scary. It is abundantly clear that Manuel suffered from a multitude of mental health issues that clearly weren't being dealt with. Shortly after this terrible event, Manuel did end up taking his own life in his jail cell. In our number 7 spot today we have Lawrence Singleton. Behind the horrifying story of this real-life monster is one of the most incredible survival stories, and that is the one of Mary Vincent. Although Lawrence is believed to have taken the lives of more than a dozen women, Mary Vincent thankfully survived after being attacked by Lawrence. The story is incredibly gruesome. He harmed her, he threw her out of the car, and he also removed her arms with a hatchet and left her in a concrete pipe. But Mary thankfully fought with everything she had in her and got herself out of the embankment she was in, flagged down a car, and got herself to safety and to medical help. After this, she continued to be amazing and not only was able to identify her attacker, but also she testified against him. Here's where this terrifying confession comes in though. After Mary was done testifying against him in court, as she walked out of the courtroom, Lawrence whispered to her, quote, "If it's the last thing I'll do, I'll finish the job." He died. She's still alive, so guess not. In our number 6 spot today we have Ted Bundy. If you know anything about true crime, you most definitely have heard of one of the most famous killers of all time, Ted Bundy. Ted killed upwards of 30 people during his crime spree in the 1970s, and most interviews with Ted are extremely well known, but there is one interview that is very disturbing that is not quite as popular as the others. In this interview, he is talking about taking the life of the student Georgianne Hawkins. The chilling part of it is how he talks about things just so matter-of-factly, like it's a casual conversation between friends and not him describing the horrific acts he committed.
Quite lucid, talking about things. It's funny. It's not funny, but it's odd the kinds of things people say under those circumstances. She had a Spanish test the next day, and she thought that I had taken her to help tutor me for a Spanish test.
After that clip, this interview unfortunately just gets even more disturbing as he begins whispering some more terrifying details. When I first saw this interview, I was listening through headphones, and you guys, the chill you get from having an absolute monster whispering in your ear, it's incomparable.
The Hawkins girl's head was severed and taken up the road about 25 to 50 yards and buried in a location about 10 yards west of the road on a rocky hillside.
After this horrible whispering part, he continues on with the rest of the details of that day in the same casual conversation tone that we heard before. If it wasn't obvious after listening to this specific interview, it is very clear just how disturbing Ted Bundy really was. In our number 5 spot today, we have the Vampire of Dusseldorf. Peter Kürten, who is also known as the Vampire of Dusseldorf, was actually a German serial killer from the 1930s. This man committed some incredibly atrocious acts for which he was tried and convicted. He ended up being found guilty for the killing of 9 people as well as attempting to take the lives of 7 more. This guilty verdict led to him being sentenced to beheading, which took place in 1931 when Peter was 48 years old. How he got the nickname as the Vampire of Dusseldorf was because he admitted to having drunk the blood of at least one of his victims, if not more. This is terrible to know, but it's all important as it relates to his confession, which honestly sent shivers down my spine. Apparently, right before his execution, he is said to have been thinking of the sound that the blood would make. His own. He is said to have asked, quote, "After my head is chopped off, will I still be able to hear, at least for a moment, the sound of my own blood gushing from the stump of my neck? I don't know." After which he added, quote, "That would be the pleasure to end all pleasures." Okay, that one speaks for itself. In our number 4 spot today, we have Dennis Rader. The BTK killer, whose real name is Dennis Rader, was one of the worst serial killers from 1974 to 1991. He left taunting letters for police and newspapers where he described his crimes, and this turned out to be his demise, because after an over 10-year hiatus, his huge ego just couldn't handle, just shutting up and just being quiet, so he started to communicate with the media again in 2004. This subsequently helped the investigation and led to his arrest in 2005. At his trial, he decided to describe his crimes in detail, but also make absolutely no apology for it. Not like an apology would help, but he certainly displayed quite a level of psychopathic behavior.
Or whatever money, I guess they didn't have very much money. And there I realized that, I didn't have a mask on or anything. They already could ID me, and made a decision to go ahead and put them down, I guess, or strangle them.
He ended up being sentenced to 10 consecutive life sentences with a minimum of 175 years, but no sentencing could truly ever be long enough. He remains at the El Dorado Correctional Facility, where he will most likely stay for the rest of his life. In our number 3 spot today, we have Robert Pickton. This horrible person is one of the worst Canadians to ever live, and is one of our country's worst serial killers ever. Robert Pickton dropped out of school and began working at his family's pig farm, and this is where most of his absolutely horrific crimes took place. He was first arrested in 2002 and was convicted in 2007 of taking the lives of 6 people, but throughout an extremely lengthy investigation, evidence of many more killings came to light. During his time in jail, an undercover police officer posed as his cellmate, and Pickton confessed to 49 crimes to him. Yeah, he was saying to the undercover officer that he wanted to take 1 more life to make it an even 50, and that he only got caught because he was sloppy. The entire trial was a bit of a mess, but it led to a life sentence without the possibility of parole for 25 years, which was the longest possible sentence under Canadian law at the time. This unfortunately does mean that he will be eligible for parole within the next decade. In our number 2 spot today, we have Elizabeth Wettlaufer. This messed up confession comes from a woman who is named Elizabeth, and she was a nurse in Canada who was working at a long-term care home for elderly people. This woman, who was supposed to have dedicated her life to helping and caring for these people, instead she was doing things that had her being dubbed an angel of death. Between 2007 and 2014, she confessed to killing 8 of her patients, and she also confessed to attempting to take the lives of 4 more. On October 5th, 2016, she sat down with Detective Constable Nathan Hergott of the Woodstock Police, where she was recorded giving her 2.5-hour confession. And man, she's just sitting there talking like she's describing what she had for lunch and not what terrible things she did for years.
I took something from you that was precious and it was taken too soon. I honestly believed at the time that God wanted me to do it, but I know now that's not true.
Yeah, she really just rambles on. Elizabeth is Canada's most prolific female serial killer, which is truly a title no one should aspire to hold. In our number 1 spot today, I have Kevin Davis. You guys, this is truly one of the most disturbing things I've ever heard in my entire life. Kevin Davis was 18 years old when he took the life of his own mother. It seems as though there was some sort of conversation beforehand that had made him upset, which of course is never a good enough reason to do something like this, but there are details about this crime I just wish that I could unlearn. In an interview with police, he gives them an extremely detailed account of basically everything that happened and seems to show absolutely no remorse.
I went to her room, opened a drawer at the very bottom to the right. I pulled out a hammer. I went back into the living room, and well, you kind of get the gist from there. And she was out pretty quickly. So when you drive...
I truly have no words. During his trial, a doctor did testify to say that he had a personality disorder, but that he also fully knew the difference between right and wrong, and knew that his crime was wrong, and that there was no medical diagnosis that could justify his actions. Kevin is still in jail, where he will most likely spend the rest of his life, but he will become eligible for parole in 2044. Alright guys, that has been our list for today. Thanks so much for checking it out. I've been your host today, Olivia Kozlowski, and I will see you all again soon. Bye.